So I am attending from my car again, like I was last week. I was sharing last week that it's actually like I'm adjusting again, which maybe a lot of us are, to, having more in-person meetings, and not just having in-person meetings, but also having school drop-offs, and kids having to be dropped off at school. And it's like, even though kids are back in school, none of the schools are around here anyway. Some of them are doing before care, after care. So, there's still this like interesting dynamic with trying to fit in the schedule. Like, I'm used to like the schedule just being all of us at home getting on Zoom and you go play over there. Right. And so now I'm sort of trying to adjust back to like the, building in drive times and transition times. And it's like, I can't really do as many back-to-back meetings anymore if I'm going to have to be in the car getting to said meetings. So I'm attending from my car again this week because I have a meeting right after this call. So anyways, that's actually my good thing, or my positive I was going to share for today, is that I like in-person meetings. I really thrive on human interaction and being able to, be creative in person, do work together in person. There's a certain efficiency that comes with that. So, the fact that more people are open to those in-person meetings, still safety, right? There's still safety around those meetings. There's still distancing, there's still masks, but the fact that we can do that and our clients are all open to that actually makes me feel good. And I really enjoy that. So that's my sort of my good thing, I think, is being able to do that. So anyone else want to share their good things going on?
Well, with that in mind, and it's a weird, obtuse good thing, but driving into the LBO Worldwide headquarters today in St. Louis City, I actually sat in traffic for a little bit. Not like we used to 2 years ago, but it was a little bit of a slowdown. And I was like, I haven't done this in a long time, because usually you just fly right in because there's nobody on the roads. But maybe we're kind of inching back toward something sort of toward where we used to be in terms of, normalcy. I don't know that we'll ever go back to normal, and that's not a bad or a good thing, but it was kind of cool. It was like, all right, I feel like I'm back in the normal world a little bit here. So it's fun. So
yeah, that's awesome. It's like, you never thought you'd be saying, I actually enjoyed traffic.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's talk about that again in a couple of weeks, because 270 is getting crappy again.
I was going to say,
I saw that.
I was
actually
actually
say it takes you an hour and a half to get home. You won't.
That's where I get the traffic.
The irony of my good thing and Mark's good thing is hilarious, because I actually was late to a meeting with Allison just the other day because of traffic on 270. And I was like, I'm not used to sitting in traffic. Like, I didn't even account for traffic.
Yes. Yeah.
So
amazing. So
anybody else good things?
I have a client who's expanding nationally, and so there's a lot of licensing work and that sort of growth work coming up.
That's awesome. That's really cool. When your clients grow and you're able to grow, that's awesome. Anybody else? All right, great. Well, let's dive in. I'm actually glad that Allison, I'm glad you're all on the call today, but I'm glad that Allison and Joe are on the call since they're in bigger firms. So Mike was on with Mark and I while everybody else was trying to get on a couple of weeks ago, which was such a weird, bizarre thing. So we just moved that topic to today because I do think it's a really relevant discussion right now to be talking about turnover and just how employee turnover really does impact our abilities to achieve in our businesses. And thank God no one in Mike's firm is turning over, because it's him. So, the second he gets fired, as he's out of business, right? So, but I do think it's, this idea of turnover. I mean, it's connected to, I think, clients, and it's connected to employees. Just when clients turn over, that impacts our business, obviously. When employees turn over, it impacts our business. And so I wanted to have a good discussion around, number one, let's start with, how have you seen employee turnover negatively impact, or maybe negatively is putting a bias out there. I mean, how have you seen employee turnover impact your business? And that could be there could be some pros and cons around that. And let's just start with that. And then we'll go from there to talk about what are ideas that we have that can help keep that turnover low. But let's just start with what our experiences have been in a more open conversation way.
Well, I'll throw something out there just to get things going. When I was at Thompson Coburn, and I won't name any groups or anything, but we had some groups, some practice groups that had some turnover, and it was very interesting because all the leadership of each practice group, the leaders were not always exactly the same, which is what you would expect. And one of them who was a very forward-thinking woman, and she said, when I have somebody leave, I don't go out and replace that person. I step back and I look at our needs, the opportunities in our business sector for our practice, and I find out, who do I need to hire? And it may be just like the person who left, or it may be somebody different. And as a result of that, I can think of a couple of examples where she brought in usually mid-level partner types who were able to bring with them partial book of business that filled a gap that made a lot of sense for that practice group, or who just offered services that we didn't have a lot of bench strength on. So, when you have that turnover, you can make some hay by bringing in the right replacement or the right person to get your team numbers back up. It just requires a little thought, and I'm not being critical at all. It's just really easy to fall into the trap of, well, we lost this person, we need to find one just like her. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It can be an opportunity to make adjustments on the fly that can benefit both the firm and your existing clients.
That's what I was going to say too. Like, the pro is definitely, it's an opportunity to look at how you're doing things and what's really needed out of that position, because sometimes, in a lot of cases, turnover, it can happen because the person isn't a good fit, whether they don't feel like they're a good fit or the firm doesn't feel like they're a good fit. So what was it about that position? Sometimes it's a person thing, and it's not always a bad thing, because I've had people leave because they did not want to meet the expectations that we set. And I don't consider that a negative turnover, because that gives us the opportunity to bring in someone who does want to perform better and meet those expectations. And we've had a lot of success in actually improving morale by bringing in people who are more aligned that way with our expectations. The negative, of course, is, okay, there's a gap between when that person leaves and someone new comes in, and getting that work covered without burning everybody else out. The learning curve and onboarding, training, all of those things take time, and that puts a burden on the staff or attorneys who are still with us. But I think a lot of it is about how you approach it and think about it.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I come down on it too, is almost exactly what Allison was saying. It can be seen in both a good and a bad light. I mean, the good is it brings new ideas. The good is it pushes you to rethink exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. Is it a people problem or is it a process problem? And then the bad is, in my experience, usually turnover, depending upon the employee, if it's somebody that's been there long term, you lose a lot of institutional knowledge. And most of us, as just human beings, we have a lot of stuff up here, but it's not written down anywhere else. And so some of that is lost with turnover if you have a long-term employee. With a newer, shorter-term employee, Allison's right. From my experience, you have to figure out how you're going to cover the work, that gap in work, if it's a newer turnover employee.
And something we're working on right now is the concept and idea of being a learning organization and sharing that knowledge to try to help combat some of that one person knows how to do all of the things. That is not exactly human nature and a huge cultural shift if you haven't been that way before. So we're exploring baby steps in that direction. Like instead of just me or the HR person pushing out training and saying, you need to do this, hey, here's this session, get a small group together, talk about what you learned. Because we want to encourage and foster that collaboration, because software is so huge. Like no one person can know everything, but together we might learn different ways of doing things that make everyone better. So that's just one idea that we're consciously talking about right now.
Allison, do you find that is a good way to sort of break down silos or prevent them from developing?
Really hoping that's what happens. I've seen it. So I manage our office services team, the receptionist, mail, office supplies, IT, things like that. I manage their day-to-day directly. And that is something that I have seen a lot of success with is I said, okay, everybody's got to be able to cover everybody's stuff. And so we put in place a lot of cross training, came up with a plan. They were accountable to it. And that it really helped with the team building too, because they had to work together. They could no longer just be responsible for what their one lane. They had to know how to function in other areas. So I think it'll be successful and helpful for even the other staff. Can't hurt to try.
Has that morphed into people who get cross-trained on one system or process or procedure or whatever, saying, hey, how about if we try this? So are you finding you're to the point where you're getting some process improvement out of it?
A little bit, yeah. So we also meet monthly as a team, and I put it on them to work together and to discuss these types of things as a group. Because you do have to foster the communication with it. And another thing that I do is if someone comes to me complaining about what someone else is doing, I kind of put it back on them. Okay, so what's your proposed solution? How do you see that working? Why don't you go talk to that person about it and see what they have to say? Because I don't want to be the answer person for everything,
Well, it's also good to kind of foster that culture of don't just bring me questions and problems, bring me questions and problems and a couple of solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're stuck, absolutely. Let's talk about where you're stuck if you need help thinking through something. But I learned real fast. Do not just come to me just to complain about something. I don't want to be that person for you.
I was going to share that, one thing I think that happens is that when we grow so quickly sometimes in our law firms, and because we don't always have a business maturity or sophistication or acumen, call it what you want, we just keep, Joe and I have talked about this a lot, that we keep like throwing humans at what is like a technology or a process problem. And if we could just take a step back and actually like having established procedures, I'm going to say his name out loud because it'll make him feel good, and I'll text him and tell him I was quoting him on this call. So Ian Dubman is, he was my ops director at my former firm, and he had a quality background. And in quality and operations, especially in large organizations, like you live and die by procedures, right? And no one wants to die in those organizations. And there's so much compliance in those environments that procedures are so critical, right? And on this topic of turnover, it's like when people get started, they get started on shaky ground if you don't have procedures or don't have good training in place. And that can lead to really good people turning over faster than you want them to, simply because they don't have the structure in place needed. And when we are in startup mode, or we're naturally entrepreneurial in our firms, sometimes we get so far down the road where we're still acting like a startup, but we're 50 people or 40 people, right? And no one wants to take the time to take a step back and create a procedure. And like, I just created a procedure for one of our clients the other day. Like, I created a legal billing procedure for one of our clients, and it took me like an hour and a half. Not that long. Like, it took an hour and a half, but it's so daunting, right? To think like it's like entering time. Like, people hate entering time, right? We have this perceived concept that, oh, drafting this procedure is going to take me like 10 hours, but it's not, because most people have it all up here. It's just prioritizing and carving out that hour or 2 hours to actually get it down on paper. But once it's in that document, it's going to set other people up to succeed. And even that person, right? I mean, it's the idea of procedures feels like procedures, right? That sounds like fun. Oh, let's draft a bunch of procedures for on a Friday night, right? But I have been amazed at the difference, even in a large company. Once we had procedures in place, thank you, Ian Dubman, how it helped people feel more secure in their jobs, because they didn't feel like every day they were just trying to figure it out. They actually had a playbook that told them how to do it, right? And even in our environment, there are some things that, yes, you're trying to figure it out and fumble through, but procedures aren't set it and forget it either. They have to be re-looked at, annually is always my recommendation. And we can prevent losing really good people by having a great onboarding process that affirms their decision to join us, right? We don't want like first impressions mean everything. We don't want people being like, oh God, what did I do? And a component of that is the fluffy stuff. Like, are we taking them to lunch? Like, are we giving them the niceties? Are we giving them the logo products? One thing I did at my very first corporate job is we created a little goodie box that all new employees got, with some logo products and some, not just general office supplies, but something that made them feel kind of special, and it was kind of fun. That whole freaking box was like $20 to put together. And these days they actually have services that do that for you, right? So I just wanted to sort of emphasize like the importance of onboarding in helping retain good people that you don't want to otherwise lose, especially losing them early on in that process. And a piece of that onboarding is training and procedures. And I've seen the training and procedures and the onboarding process work really well and it be great. And I've also seen it not, right? I mean, I've been a part of both, where people are like floundering and saying, I just don't know how to do this, right? Like, what, just give me good direction, So that's sort of what I was going to offer to the conversation. I think about at least one piece of how we can help. I jumped to solutions instead of my experiences, but anyways, that was just one thing that I wanted to offer. Any other ideas on solutions or things that could help prevent, bad turnover, like people leaving? I mean, once you create a training culture and you invest a lot of dollars and time into a lifelong learning value, I will say it hurts a lot more when people leave, because you've invested so much. And when they take that all to be, a better version of themselves, but somewhere else, there is a little bit of a sting that goes on in here. So I don't know. Let's talk more about ideas and solutions for preventing that turnover.
Have you heard of Kat Cole at all?
I don't think so.
Kat Cole is an executive, and she used to be the CEO of I don't know the parent company, but Cinnabon. And in the spring of this year, I read a really good article by her, which stated that an employee's retention is heavily skewed towards the first month of their employment at your company. And then within that month is most heavily skewed to the first 2 weeks. Once I read that, with 2 new employees starting and a third here starting in another week, what I did on my end is create essentially a new employee playbook. And so that it kind of walks through, hey, this is the reason we exist. We exist because we're a client-centric firm. We exist to have teamwork amongst each other, to help each other out, something that gives a new person a little bit more emphasis for the bigger organization as a whole. In conjunction with that, once I saw the statistics about the first 2 weeks, I also started creating a 2-week schedule. So a 2-week training schedule, literally broken down by hours. And so then that way, a new person starting has a really good sense of, all right, I know what I'm going to be doing. And then I established also daily check-ins so that there's a daily check-in procedure for at least the first 2 weeks. I don't know how that's going to play out. I don't know how that's going to turn out, but hopefully that prevents some of the turnover long term.
I'm really curious about this because onboarding is something that we do struggle with, so who are the check-ins with? Are you checking in with them? Is it?
Yep.
Okay.
It would be people that are working on our team as a whole. But we have two offices, well, 3 offices, but 2 staffed offices. And that's in Central Illinois. And so the new hires are primarily coming into the office where I'm physically located. And so the check-ins are by phone or by in-person meeting, but they're with me. It's
okay.
Where are your points of friction? What do you have questions about? What can be done better? And some people say nothing. Some people say, well, my computer was really slow today, or I'm having trouble, like just a simple thing. One example was I can't dial out. Well, that's because you have to dial 9 first. Okay, well, now I know from my end of things as the person who's ultimately responsible for some of the stuff, it's okay, that needs to be incorporated into the written procedure. How do you dial out 9 and then dial out? So yeah, I'm trying to do that in an effort to prevent turnover.
I was going to suggest too, we do have, so at the big firm, we actually had a checklist. We have that at LBO now too, but not by specific role, which we're working on it, but an onboarding checklist. And it's typically the manager. So like we had a paralegal manager that would do all the onboarding for all the legal staff. And that checklist included all the things like phone training, like our schedule time with IT. And in advance, the HR team would actually help schedule. So on our new hires calendars, we're already an hour with someone in IT, and to make sure they were all set up. And that checklist, it would actually get checked off and put in their employee file, because then it helped that, again, that's like a quality thing, right? Where we're setting this expectation and this procedure that this is how we onboard new people. But then we're going to check ourselves and make sure it's actually happening. We would pre-schedule time with HR for an hour so they could go through their benefits paperwork with them together. Like, because we didn't expect, there's no way the paralegal manager is going to know everything they need to know about HR, or even everything they know about IT, and nor is it worth their time, right, to be training them on their phones. But like, gone are the days where phones used to be simple, and they're just not freaking simple. They're just not simple anymore. And so it's like, as tech savvy as I am, sometimes I'm like perplexed by some of these systems. It's like, I'm a pretty smart tech savvy person, but I cannot figure out how to get my voicemail. Like, what the hell is going on, right? So that was one of the things we did to help fill that onboarding gap. And a part of the onboarding checklist was just what you're talking about, Joe. That's the follow-up. So a certain amount of days in, I think it was like a week in, and then a month in, and then 90 days in, it was that manager already pre-calendared. All this was calendared before that person even stepped in the door to reach out to them and to check in. And we actually even had a little survey that asked specific questions. So we knew it wasn't all left up to that manager to ask the right questions. Right? So, because otherwise you're really dependent on the person saying, I'm just checking in. Well, sometimes new people are like afraid to criticize or say something that's wrong because they don't want to be looked like they don't know what they're doing. Or the manager doesn't know how to ask the right questions, that if they said, how is it going with your phone? How's technology treating you? Right? Or the picking up on those cues. Like someone might say, well, my internet's been a little bit slow, but I think that's because a lot of people have been in. Well, they may not do anything about it, but maybe there's something that could be done. So a defined, I'm calling it a survey, but you know what I mean by that, right? It's that questionnaire, if you will. Yeah.
A standardized checklist for lack of a better term, but a standardized questionnaire.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And you can have one on board, standardized checklist questionnaire, whatever you want to call it. You can have that on board, and on a new hire by new hire basis, someone in HR or the department head or somebody can look at it and say, well, we don't need to cover that or that, but for sure the rest. You can sort of customize it on the fly. It's not a bad idea at all.
So what other ideas do you all have? So we talked about onboarding, helping to a good onboarding process, good procedures, helping to eliminate the turnover of those people that, you really want to stay in the organization. What other solutions have you seen that have worked really well in preventing turnover? I can talk about this all day long, but this is not the Jamie show. That was like one of my primary roles at the big firm I was at, was like, that was my primary job when I started, was get our turnover lowered. I do a training session on this, on recruiting and retaining top talent, specifically in law firms. And one of the pieces we talk about is culture. And I'm not actually, so when I say culture, I'm not defining that in a particular way. It's, what is your culture at your firm to you all? Like, how have you defined it? And are you actually acting in accordance with that definition? So I like to use Thomson Coburn as an example. I know that they'll forgive me and love me because it's the truth. When you accept a job at Thomson Coburn, you're going to work your ass off, right? Like, the billable hour expectation when you start working at Thomson Coburn as a lawyer is, yes, we say you have to bill 1,800 and that's the minimum, but if you really want to be recognized, you better be billing 2,000, right? So if we know that about our culture, like, hey, to get ahead here, you bill. Let's not say that we promote a work-life balance and we promote, people taking care of their, families and taking care of their jobs. And like, let's just not say that, right? Let's just be who we are. So if we say we're a transparent and open door, I love that phrase, open door. I love it because that was very trendy for a long time. And a lot of our law firm owners and equity partners are from sort of that era when that was a very popular term. So it's in a lot of employee handbooks. And I genuinely think a lot of leaders think open door means I physically just keep my door open. But you can have a physical open door and not actually have an open door like culture at all. So just walking the talk, right? Not just talking the talk, like be who you say you are, I think is really important to preventing turnover, because it is more detrimental to say you're one thing and then people's experience is completely different than to just put it out there who you are in the beginning. Because if talent doesn't want to be a part of that culture, if they don't want to bill 2,000 hours in the year, they're not going to come work for you. They're going to make a choice to go somewhere else rather than starting to work for you and leave in a year. Then you've invested that whole year in that person for them to just leave. And not only that, but they're leaving with a bunch of bitterness because you told them one thing and they experienced something different. There's no way you can prevent all of it. I'm not suggesting that there's like a magic button here. But I've experienced that so much before. And also, when you have a bunch of leaders that lead differently, it's amazing how one team's experience can be completely different than another team's experience in terms of culture. And so trying to ensure consistency of application or consistency of management of those culture decisions is really important too. Like I saw a results only work environment, right? We don't care when and where you work, so long as you get your work done. right? And there are certain expectations around that. Yes, when you have court, you have to show up. Yes, when you have court, we want you to look good. Yes, when you have a client meeting, you need to be at the office to be in the client meeting, right? That's fair. But where and when you manage your life, we don't care. Well, we had some managers truly managing it that way. And then others that would say to people, well, I noticed you left at 4 yesterday. What's going on? It's like, well, that's not really a results only work environment. It shouldn't matter that they left at 4, like they're billing what they should be billing. And so how do you consistently keep that vision in front of people and hold your leaders accountable to managing to that cultural expectation in a consistent way as well? So I thought I would just offer that concept as well.
Yeah, and I remember when I was at, you said Thompson Coburn, and I'll talk about my times there. We had times when they would interview somebody who was considering making a move to Thompson Coburn, and we had some of the practice area leadership that was very honest about what you just talked about, Jamie. You better be at 2,000. And, they told me that sometimes a prospective, attorney a lateral would say, well, you know what, we just had our third baby. I'm not really in a place where I want to do that. And the way that they would leave it is, well, you know what, you know who we are, you know what we're doing. We totally understand where you're at in your life. And when you get to your next season and things are different, call us, get in touch with us. We love your qualifications. We love everything about you. It's just not the right fit right now for both of us. Doesn't mean it never will be. And that was a really cool, and it wasn't like you said, Jamie, this was not across the board.
Right, sure.
But it was in a couple of the practice groups, and that worked really well because they ended up getting in the near term was they got referrals.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Just because one lawyer can't do the 2,100 hour a year billing goal doesn't mean that his or her friends can't and aren't interested in that. They wouldn't love that opportunity. So they got points for being straight shooters.
Yeah,
and that's a good thing.
That is a good thing.
It's a lot smarter than bringing in someone who isn't going to be a good fit because you weren't upfront about it. And then not only do they have a bad taste in their mouth, you're not getting referrals and you're getting a bad rep out in the community about it. It is much better, I think, to own who you are, however that lands.
Yeah, exactly. I actually want to give Joe Cordell some really huge kudos about something. I really like the way that he words the interview process. I mean, he's a straight shooter by nature, but he taught me, when you're interviewing someone, we tend to think of that exchange as a sales process in our heads because the candidate's trying to convince the company how great they are and how perfect they are for the role because maybe they're looking for a job or maybe they just saw this as an opportunity. The company's equally trying to sell the candidate on how great they are as a company and how, this role is perfect for them. I mean, it really is a sales exchange in which, we're just trying to convince each other because we both have a need potentially, right? Versus I will never forget his exact phrasing is where we have a transparent conversation by which we both figure out, is this a good fit? And because the interviewing process is as much about that person making a decision about do they want to come work for us as it is about us deciding, are they a good fit for the role that we have? And I always say, you should actually know by the end of a first interview whether it's a good fit or not. And candidates love it when you say, you know what, you are lovely. You have great experience. This has been a great conversation, but I feel like for these reasons, this probably isn't a good fit right now for you or for us. They love being able to hang up the phone and knowing that that's the decision. And it cuts out the administrative burden from having to send them a notice after the fact that says that they're not a great fit, right? But huge kudos to Joe Cordell because he taught me that. Don't treat an interview as a sales exchange, but a transparent conversation in which we both figure out, is this a good fit? So I think that's
key words there, Jamie. Right now. I love that because it doesn't mean it's over forever. It's just right now.
Right.
It's a really good way to look at it.
And it's funny because if you talk to the best salespeople, they'll say the exact same thing. It's not a sales opportunity. It's finding out if what you have is the best fit.
Yes, exactly. Because that's not a volume based process. That's a long term, we want to get the right clients, we want to get the right people, so we're not constantly churning, and that is, we didn't talk a lot about recruiting, we talked about onboarding, but how you recruit is very critical to getting the right people, not just in, setting correct expectations, but also like, are you consistently asking the right questions? If you're not using a structured interview guide in your recruiting process, I highly recommend that you do, because whenever you're talking to 5 different people, if you're dependent upon that manager doing the interview just off the cuff or going through the resume, how do you really compare apples to apples? But if you ask behavioral interviewing questions, tell me about a situation when you had to face conflict and how you handled it. And if you ask that same question to all 5 candidates, now you can really compare their answers, right? And is this a high conflict role in which you need someone that's going to handle it in a particular way? And we used at my first corporate job a spreadsheet for all the candidates, so we could the manager could actually see all the answers right next to each other for the candidates.
Right.
And that protects you. It protects you too from discrimination in the hiring process, because you asked all the candidates the same questions. So that's another way. I think managing your recruiting process in a consistent way is another way to ensure you get the right people on board and keep them longer.
Terrific.
The last thing I thought we could end on and chat with about a little bit is that the idea that, I am saying generational changes, but anymore it's not generation. It's when work changes, right? When corporate America shifts, that also shifts expectations. It shifts what people are looking for. Employee engagement and satisfaction surveys continually tell us, consistent feedback, but it's been shifting in what people value and what they're looking for. And one of my famous sayings is, they're not going to change, so we have to. Meaning employees are not going to change. They're going to be influenced by corporate America, by the things that they're seeing, by their peers and what jobs they're having, by their peers and how much money they're making. But they're influenced by their personal lives and what they value, and we can't change any of that. So as a company, we have to change. Either we change the recruiting process of who we bring in, but sometimes we have to change internally to modify that. And this pandemic has really shifted corporate America and what workers expect and in what employees expect to be able to contribute, to be able to receive. And so I thought we could talk about that a little bit. Like, what shifts are you all seeing in your employees and your teams, and what they expect and how they work and how they're unable to work? What are some consistent things that you all are seeing that are different from maybe how it has been in the last 5-10 years?
I just sat in on a webinar about 3 weeks ago, and it touched on this quite a bit. And what they were saying is that it's weird because we've all been talking about work-life balance for years, all of us on this call. And that has changed over the course of the pandemic, because we're now almost, we're like a year and a half now into this new mode, and a lot of people working from home. And kind of one of the points that came out of this webinar was, it used to be work-life balance was Jamie's going to leave at 5 and pick up the kids at the after-school program and be home and make dinner at 5:45. Well, now, Jamie might be at home all day, but working from home. And so we used to sort of mentally, a lot of us could kind of clock out a lot of days at 5 or 5:30 or whenever it was. Now people are more willing to turn the computer on after the kids go to bed and put in 45 minutes, just wrapping up a couple things, prepping for tomorrow. And it's not viewed as the intrusion that it used to be, because we've been home all day or been home part of the day or whatever. So the notion of work-life balance has radically shifted over the last year and a half. So, you don't feel like, it's just got, the lines have blurred, I guess, is what I'm saying. And that was kind of a point that they made in this webinar. And one thing that they underscored in this webinar is we're now in a position as a country where we've got over 9 million empty jobs that employers are trying to fill. And if you're an employer who's not nimble, quick, creative, and open-minded, you're going to have a really tough time in an employee market, because employees have the upper hand, prospects have the upper hand right now. They've got a lot of choices to make. So,
Yep.
I think that as you're talking, Mark, I definitely agree. The notion of what work-life balance means or looks like. I was at a seminar one time where a panelist said, "That's bullshit. It doesn't exist. Just drop that. It's your life, and how does everything fit together?" And I know, like for myself, I had a completely different rhythm to my life when my kid was going to school only half days in person. And so I was remote most of the time. And now that things are more back to normal, I have really been struggling with this rhythm. I don't like this rhythm of making the commute in every single day, and then the pressure of sitting on 270 in that traffic, so I think that it's going to be really important for firms and companies to continue the conversation and understand that what works right now, people probably will want to continue adjusting and tweaking, and we should be open to that if we want to keep them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's kind of what I've seen too. Like I have always been a proponent of not using that phrase work-life balance because we just have one life. And the flow of when that life happens, like, can anyone go to the dentist outside of business hours? No, the dentist isn't even freaking open outside of business hours. But you know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. And adults are adults. They shouldn't have to like request time off to go to the dentist. Right. And like stuff happens in our lives that we have to take care of, obviously. This shift that I have seen has been now that we've got this fluidity, I think in between work, because LBO has been virtual the entire time we've existed, the fluidity of life and going in and out of what you have to do for your family and for yourself and for work is already like a normal part of our culture. What happened during the pandemic is that I think the pendulum has swung so far one way where now we're taking care of all of our personal stuff ahead of the business stuff. And then things aren't getting done on the business side, but we're tired at 9:00 at night. But we've maybe only worked 5 hours in the day. And there's still like a couple hours of work of things that need to get done. And no one wants to work from 9 to 11. And I don't blame them. I don't blame me. But as a business owner, when you're paying people for a certain amount of output and life, the pendulum has swung that way. I sort of went on this diatribe on my vision meeting with LBO this week was, guys, it's me too, right? The pendulum, I think, has swung too far over here where now we're saying, you know what, it's fine if I miss that meeting or if I'm just late to that meeting, or I'm just going to take that meeting from the car because I really need to drive down the street and get my new driver's license. It's like, well, can you really engage in a meeting? I'm parked. I'm clearly in my car, but can you really engage in a meeting if you're driving? Probably not. So, guys, if this is the expectation, and so that's one of the shifts that I've seen. And as a leader, how do you hold people accountable to what your expectations are as a company and within their jobs, but also have that patience and grace for what people have been going through personally? So that's been my challenge. I have zero answers for it. I'm still working through it.
One of the tough parts from working with associate attorneys is, especially through the pandemic, is getting an appreciation for an associate attorney or a young associate attorney that's newly starting. There's a nuance between what you can appear by Zoom for in court and what you should probably show up to an in-person hearing if that's available. Mm-hmm. That dichotomy seems to be lost in the last year and a half.
Yep. It has been pretty funny. Have you guys watched any of the like outrageous Zoom calls with lawyers and like how they're dressed and like wearing like hoodies and pajamas and or the funny memes that have like it's sad, right? It's sad. It's like where has our professionalism gone? But at the same time, you can't help but laugh,
Yeah, and the sweatpants and the shirt and tie look is very funny.
Well,
Hybrid approach.
Hybrid, yeah. Is there anything else anyone, wanted to share just on the turnover topic? Any other thoughts or ideas? All right. Well, let's bring us around the home base here. So, does anybody have anything that you've run across recently that's particularly amusing, funny, meme, joke, video, anything you want to share that could lighten all of our days this Thursday? Gerald, I know you've got to have something.
I was just thinking, I bet I have something.
I know. I'm like, I know. So I see Gerald's like social media feed all the time. And I'm like, I know you have something in your back pocket. So Gerald's kind of new to our calls. We always like to wrap up with some limerick or funny meme because in the heaviness of everything we're going through and have been for the last year and a half, we like to end on sort of a funny note. And I didn't come as prepared as I normally do. So do you have anything? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I did not come prepared with the funny.
Anybody else see anything? I'm like, this is going to sound really like bad, but I feel like most of the things that have been shared with me recently are not ones that are appropriate to share.
Yeah. Exactly.
Let me see if I can find. I'm like, okay.
I have one, Jamie. I'll see if I can share it. It's it's not necessarily funny. It's probably something that's more akin to your business.
Okay.
Not sure if you can see this.
Yeah, we can. Instead of risking anything new, let's play it safe by putting our political line into obsolescence. Can you email that to me?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
We need it. Like, Mark, we need to do something with this. Like, we
ought to do one on risk and lawyers because lawyers are very, very much planned. You guys are trained and you work in identifying risk for your clients and telling them how to minimize or avoid it. And I think that sort of seeps into them not being critical. How could it not seep into the management of law firms? And when I got into legal, after being in other industries, that was one of the first things I noticed is like, man, these guys are super careful. They never swing for the fences. And that's not a bad thing. But maybe you ought to do one of these calls on how do you manage, the ability to tolerate risk and what's appropriate, what's not, and how do we do this? I don't know. I might be getting a little too close to the bone with that topic, but it might not be a bad idea.
No, doing it afraid, is a big deal. Like sometimes, yeah, it's like you acknowledge there's a risk, but you have to do it afraid because if you don't, like the consequences are far worse of not changing at all. So,
because I can think of somebody on this call who has accepted risk and swung for the fences, Jamie. That would be you. Took a chance.
Yeah.
And it worked out,
Working it out every day. Hey, thank you all for your time. I'm glad that you could all be here. Thank you for the discussion. I think this has been awesome. I'm really looking forward to the write-up that Mark puts together because I think there's a lot of good nuggets of wisdom in here. So
2 pages of notes.
Hope you have a great day and a great weekend.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
Yeah.